The lecture hall of the Galactic Concordance Academy was a vast circular room. Its domed ceiling was a projected star map, showing 1,000,000 suns in perfect silent clarity. The air smelled clean and carried a faint hum of machinery, and the subtle, sweet scent of the oxygen-purifying plants that grew in recessed beds along the walls. The students were a collection of beings from across known space. There were the Veln, tall and slender with large dark eyes communicating with soft mental pulses that others could sometimes feel as a tickle in their minds. There were the Cathari, their skin shimmering with shifting colors that reflected their mood and thoughts. There were others too, from heavy gravity worlds and gas giant habitats. And then there was Jiwoo. She sat quietly at her terminal near the back, a solitary figure in a simple gray cadet uniform. Her black hair was tied back neatly. Her eyes, a deep brown, moved constantly, watching the instructor, the screens, the other students. She was the first and only human cadet from Earth, a place most here referred to as Terra. Her people were the new members of the Galactic Concordance, and everyone was watching them. Everyone was judging. The instructor, a venerable Veln named Mentor Sol, was explaining the principles of faster-than-light navigation through dense stellar clusters. His voice was calm and melodic. The key, Sol said, is not to push against space, but to allow the natural gravitational currents to pull your vessel. It requires patience. It requires a quiet mind. A sudden emotional reaction to a stellar flare or a dust cloud can send a ship spiraling into the void. A hand went up. It was Kalen. He was a Cathari, and he sat at the very front. His skin glowed with a confident, steady gold light. He was by every measure the Academy's star pupil. "Mentor," Kalen began, his voice clear and carrying. "This seems inefficient." A pre-calculated jump, using the ship's own power to carve a straighter path, would save significant time, even with a higher energy cost. Relying on natural forces is passive. It was a direct challenge to the lesson. A few soft clicks of agreement came from other Cathari students. Mentor Sol remained unruffled. "A valid point, Cadet Kalen, and one that highlights a philosophical difference between our species. The Cathari way is one of brilliant, forceful control. The Veln way and the way we teach here is one of harmony and efficiency. There is less risk. There is also less gain," Kalen replied smoothly, not arrogantly, but with absolute certainty. He then demonstrated his point on his own holographic display, his long, three-fingered hands moving quickly. A complex star chart appeared, and he plotted a bold, direct route that shaved days off the mentor's suggested path. The math was flawless. A ripple of appreciation went through the class. He was brilliant. Everyone knew it. Jiwoo watched, her face neutral. She understood Kalen's math. It was risky, but it was smart. On Earth, a pilot might try such a thing. But she also saw the wisdom in Mentor Sol's way. It was safer, more reliable. She saw value in both. She did not, however, offer her opinion. She never did. When the lecture ended, the students began to gather their things. Kalen stood, and instead of leaving, he moved through the crowd. He walked directly toward Jiwoo's terminal. A quiet fell over the students nearby. They watched curious. The human was an oddity, and Kalen's interest in her was always a source of potential drama. Kalen stopped beside her desk. His shimmering form cast a soft, colorful light on her gray uniform. "Cadet Jiwoo," he said. His tone was polite, but there was a sharp edge underneath, like a knife wrapped in silk. "I have been reviewing the historical data on your species. It is fascinating." Jiwoo slowly closed her data slate and looked up at him. She said nothing. "Your neural physiology is so unique," Kalen continued, speaking louder now so others could hear. "So much of your brain is dedicated to emotional processing. To fear, to anger, to what you call fight or flight. It must be like trying to think clearly with a constant alarm bell ringing in your mind." A few soft laughs came from the small crowd that had gathered. A Veln student looked uncomfortable and drifted away. "We manage," Jiwoo said, her voice quiet but firm. "Do you?" Kalen asked, a smile touching his lips. His skin flickered with a hint of amused blue. "They have a term for you in the concordance files. Terran tenacity. It sounds impressive. It suggests great strength of will. But when we analyze it, it seems to be just a refusal to accept reality. A smarter creature, when faced with a superior force, would surrender. It would conserve its energy. It would live to fight another day. But a human will fight until it is broken. It is not tenacity. It is a flaw in logic." The words hung in the air. It was a public insult dressed up as scientific observation. Jiwoo held his gaze. Her expression did not change. There was no anger in her eyes, no shame. There was only a deep, still calm. She simply picked up her data slate and stood. "The simulation lab is next," she said, and she walked past him through the crowd, which parted to let her through. Kalen watched her go, his golden glow tinged with a faint, frustrated red. He had thrown a stone and the pond had not rippled. It was unsatisfying. The next period was in the tactical simulation lab. Here, cadets were paired up to run through virtual scenarios. Today's exercise was a simple one, a capture the flag drill in a dense asteroid field. By chance, or perhaps by the design of a testing instructor, Jiwoo and Kalen were assigned as partners. They sat side by side in the simulation pods, their minds linked to a virtual starship. The cockpit glowed around them. Kalen immediately took the captain's chair. "I will pilot," he stated. "You manage the sensor readings and shield distribution. Try to keep up." Jiwoo nodded silently and took the co-pilot's station. The simulation began. Their ship, a sleek scout vessel, drifted at the edge of the asteroid field. The enemy flag was on the other side. "Plot a course through the largest cluster," Jiwoo said, her first word since they'd started. "The sensor interference will hide our approach." "A coward's path," Kalen replied, his fingers dancing over the controls. "And predictable. We will take the open channel on the starboard side. It is faster. It's a clear firing lane. They will be waiting." "Let them wait," Kalen said, his confidence unwavering. "Our ship is faster. Our reactions will be quicker." He pushed the thrusters forward and the ship shot into the open space. Just as Jiwoo predicted, 2 enemy drones decloaked directly ahead, their weapons already charging. "Evasive pattern Delta," Jiwoo said, her hands moving to reinforce the forward shields. Kalen ignored her. He tried a complex high-G turn that looked impressive on a screen, but was terribly inefficient in a real fight. One drone's laser fire scraped their hull, and the other landed a direct hit on their engine port. Alarms blared in the virtual cockpit. Their ship spun, powerless. Simulation failed, flashed the screen in bold red letters. The pod doors hissed open. Mentor Sol was standing there, his large dark eyes looking from Kalen to Jiwoo. "An aggressive strategy, Cadet Kalen," the mentor said, "but ultimately a failed one." Kalen unstrapped himself from his seat and stood up. He looked not at Jiwoo but directly at Mentor Sol. "My apologies, Mentor," Kalen said, his voice smooth again. "I believe the Terran emotional latency in the command stream created a feedback lag in our systems. It was a minor delay, but in a high-stakes situation it was enough to cause failure." He turned his gaze to Jiwoo, his skin glowing with a cool, superior silver. "I recommend Cadet Jiwoo undergo additional neural damping training, for the good of any future team she is a part of." The lie was breathtaking. He had not only blamed her for his own mistake, but he had used the very prejudice against her species as his weapon. He had made her the living proof of his theory from the lecture hall. The other cadets in the lab were watching. Some looked skeptical, but many nodded, accepting the word of their brilliant star pupil. Jiwoo slowly got out of her seat. She looked at Kalen. She looked at the watching cadets. She looked at Mentor Sol, whose expression was unreadable. She did not argue. She did not protest. She did not show a single flicker of the anger that anyone would expect a human to feel. She simply bowed her head slightly to Mentor Sol. "I will review the simulation data," she said, her voice still quiet, still calm. Then she turned and walked out of the lab, leaving Kalen standing in his victory. But as she walked, her calmness did not feel like defeat. It felt like the deep, still silence that gathers in the heart of a storm, just before it breaks. The attack in class was over, but the real lesson was yet to begin. The incident in the simulation lab did not go away. It was a small stone dropped into the pond of the academy, and the ripples spread. Kalen's version of events became the accepted truth. The story of the human cadet whose volatile emotions disrupted a perfect tactical maneuver was too compelling, too fitting with what everyone already believed about Terrans. Jiwoo felt the change in the air. In the corridors, other cadets would give her a slightly wider berth. In the dining hall, the seats around her remained empty. It was not open hostility. It was a quiet, careful distance, as if she were a piece of unstable equipment that might explode. They were not afraid of her. They were wary of the flaw she represented. She did not try to argue or explain. She moved through her days with the same quiet focus as before. She attended lectures, took notes, and trained alone in the simulation pods during off hours. Her performance was consistently good but never spectacular. She was solid, reliable, and utterly unremarkable. This, to the other cadets, was further proof. Without a Kalen to lead her, the human was mediocre. Kalen himself seemed to feel his point had been made. For a few days he left her alone, basking in the quiet approval of his peers. But the memory of her calm, unblinking eyes in the lecture hall bothered him. He had thrown his best insult at her, and she had not flinched. He had publicly shamed her, and she had not cried or shouted. Her silence felt like a challenge he had not yet met. The next escalation came in the Zero-G combat training module. The training center was a massive, windowless chamber where gravity could be switched off. Inside floated a complex mock-up of a damaged starship, all twisted metal corridors, open elevator shafts, and dark maintenance ducts. The cadets, suited up in padded exosuits with magnetic boots, were armed with pulsar rifles. The rifles fired a low-energy stun bolt, enough to register a hit on a suit's sensors and cause a mild, tingling shock, but completely harmless. The exercise was a team battle. Blue team, led by Kalen, versus Red team. Jiwoo was on Red team. From the moment the gravity was disengaged and the start buzzer sounded, it was clear this was not a team exercise for Kalen. It was a solo performance. He moved through the Zero-G environment with a natural grace, pushing off walls and spinning through open spaces with an almost beautiful precision. He did not stick with his team. He used them as distractions, sending them down obvious paths to draw fire while he flanked through ventilation shafts and across the outer hull. One by one, the red team's markers on the scoreboard flickered and turned blue, signaling their defeat. Kalen's voice was a calm, constant stream of orders over the blue team's comms. "Jinsu, draw their fire in the mess hall. I'm approaching from the ceiling conduit." A moment later, 2 more red markers turned blue. Jiwoo moved differently. She did not have Kalen's fluid elegance. Her movements were economical and deliberate. She used shadows and cover, her magnetic boots clicking softly as she moved along walls and ceilings, staying out of the main thoroughfares. She managed to take out 2 blue team members who got careless, using a narrow junction box as a perfect ambush point. But soon, it was down to the last few. The scoreboard showed only 1 red marker left, Jiwoo. Kalen had eliminated everyone else. "The rest of you secure the perimeter." Kalen ordered his team over the comms. "The Terran is mine." He found her in the reactor core, the largest open space in the mock-up. A large sculpted metal sphere, representing the ship's power source, dominated the center of the cavernous room. Catwalks stretched around it over a sheer drop into darkness. Jiwoo was on the highest catwalk, using the reactor sphere as cover. Kalen entered from a lower level, his rifle held loosely. He didn't even aim at her. He knew she was there. "Jiwoo." His voice came over the general channel, echoing in the empty space. "It's over. Your team is gone. There is no one left to help you." This is the part where a logical being would surrender. It would conserve energy and accept the learning experience. Jiwoo didn't answer. She shifted her position, keeping the reactor between them. Kalen sighed, a theatrical sound over the comms. "This is that Terran tenacity, isn't it? That refusal to accept reality. It's not bravery. It's just noise." He began to climb, not with the hurried movements of a hunter, but with the slow, confident pace of someone who knew the outcome was certain. He reached her catwalk. They were on opposite ends, with the giant reactor sphere between them. He stayed where he was. "I'm going to make this simple," Kalen said. He switched his comm to a private channel for her ears only. "Acknowledge it. Say over the comm that human design is flawed, that your emotions make you unsuitable for command. Do that, and I will make your defeat swift and painless. You can walk out of here with some dignity." Below in the observation room, the instructors and the other cadets watched the main display. They could see the 2 avatars on the catwalk, but they could not hear the private communication. They saw Jiwoo remain perfectly still. "No?" Kalen's voice was a whisper in her helmet. "Then I will have to demonstrate." He raised his rifle, but he did not fire a standard stun bolt. With a quick adjustment to the weapon setting, he selected a different type of ammunition. It was a sensor dazzler charge. These were not for use against living targets. They were for disabling security cameras or enemy drones, non-lethal but designed to overload electronic sensors with a massive burst of energy. He fired. The blast was not a thin beam of light. It was a wide, blinding flash of white and blue that erupted from his rifle and engulfed the entire end of the catwalk where Ji-woo was hiding. On the observation screen, her avatar was completely obscured by the static. Inside her suit, Ji-woo's world dissolved into pain and chaos. Her helmet display flared pure white, then shattered into a million fragments of meaningless data. A piercing shriek screamed through her audio receivers. But worse was the physical effect. The Dazzler charge was designed to scramble electronics, and her suit systems were directly linked to her nervous system to provide tactile feedback. The overload shot through the suit's interface like a lightning bolt. Her body convulsed. Every muscle locked and then spasmed at once. A choked guttural cry was torn from her throat, a sound of pure agonizing shock. She lost her grip on her rifle, which clattered to the catwalk. Her magnetic boots disengaged and her body floated upward, limp and twitching, held only by the safety tether attached to her waist. The light from the Dazzler blast faded. On the observation screen, the other cadets watched the human's avatar drift helplessly in the zero gravity, spinning slowly. Her suit's status indicators were flashing red, signaling a systems failure. Kalen walked calmly along the catwalk. He stopped next to her floating, twitching form. He looked down at her for a long moment. He could see her face through her helmet visor. Her eyes were wide, her teeth clenched, her body still jerking with residual spasms. He switched his comms back to the general channel so everyone could hear. "See?" he said, his voice calm and analytical. "Pure impulse, no logic. No surrender protocol, just a twitching animal, unable to process its own defeat." He did not fire the final, merciful stun bolt to end the simulation. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her there, disabled and humiliated, for the instructors to recover. In the observation room, the silence was heavy. A few of the cadets shifted uncomfortably. It had been a legal move, technically. The Dazzler charge was an available tool in the simulation, but its use on a fellow cadet felt excessive. It felt cruel. Mentor Sol watched the screen, his large dark eyes fixed on Ji-woo's drifting form. His face, as always, was unreadable. When the simulation ended and gravity was restored, an instructor had to go in and manually reset Ji-woo's suit. She was unharmed physically. The safeties had seen to that. But as the systems rebooted and she slowly got to her feet on the catwalk, her body felt raw. Her hands were trembling. She took a deep, slow breath, and then another, forcing the tremors to stop. She walked out of the training chamber, past the other cadets who avoided looking at her directly. Her face was a mask showing nothing, but behind the mask something had fundamentally shifted. The quiet observation was gone. The patience had reached its end. Kalen had wanted to prove that humans were nothing but emotion. He had attacked thinking he was triggering a fight. He did not understand that he was not starting a fight. He was declaring a war. And Ji-woo, her body still humming with the memory of the pain, had just decided on her first and last strategic objective, not to win his game, but to break it. The days after the zero-G training were quiet. The other cadets gave Ji-woo even more space than before. It was not just wariness now. It was a kind of pity. They had seen her broken, twitching and helpless at the end of Kalen's rifle. To them, she was no longer just flawed. She was defeated. Kalen had proven his point beyond any doubt. Ji-woo did not react. She did not complain to the instructors. She did not confront Kalen. She moved through the academy like a ghost, her face calm, her actions precise. She attended all her classes. Her notes were perfect, and her performance in routine exercises was competent and unremarkable. It was as if the incident had never happened. But something was different. If anyone had watched her closely, they would have seen a new intensity in her eyes. The quiet observation was gone, replaced by a deep, cold focus. She was not hiding from what happened. She was studying it. She was learning. She spent every free moment in the library core not reviewing her own lessons, but pulling up every piece of data on Kalen, his simulation scores, his preferred tactics, his historical performance in every exercise from his first day at the academy. She watched recordings of his victories, not to admire them, but to break them down. She was looking for the patterns, the tiny cracks in his brilliant, perfect record. She discovered something. Kalen was a master of complex, aggressive maneuvers. He loved to control the battlefield, to force his opponent to react to him. He was like a brilliant swordsman, always on the attack, his moves beautiful and deadly. But she noticed he never planned for what happened after his initial plan succeeded. He assumed his first strike would be the last. He never had a plan B because he never believed he would need one. His greatest strength, his absolute confidence, was also a weakness. He could not comprehend an enemy who did not play by his rules. The final exams were announced. The most important was the capstone strategic simulation. It was a massive live-fire fleet exercise. The cadets would be placed in individual command pods controlling a fleet of drone ships in a complex scenario. The drones were real, small ships in a secured orbital arena, but the weapons were simulated lasers and the damage was calculated by computers. A destroyed ship would simply drift, its systems locked. The scenario was a classic one. A fleet battle near the Calvos Nebula. The nebula was a cloud of charged gas and dust that scrambled sensors and made long-range targeting impossible. One cadet would play the invader, a powerful fleet trying to break through to a vulnerable planet. The other would play the defender, a smaller outgunned fleet trying to protect it. The pairings were chosen by lottery. The entire academy gathered in the main auditorium to watch the draw on the giant screen. When the names flashed up for the premiere match, a murmur ran through the crowd. Invader Fleet, Cadet Kalen, Defender Fleet, Cadet Jiwoo. It felt like fate. A few cadets glanced at Jiwoo, who sat perfectly still in her seat. Kalen, a few rows ahead, allowed himself a small, confident smile. This was his chance to give a public final lesson. The day of the exam arrived. The command pods were isolated, soundproof rooms with a full wraparound display. Mentors and other cadets watched from the main observation deck, where a huge holographic map showed the entire battlefield. The Calvos Nebula swirled on the map, a beautiful and deadly mix of purple and blue. Kalen's invader fleet was a formidable collection of heavy destroyers and fast attack cruisers, represented by bright red icons. Jiwoo's defender fleet was smaller, a mix of older cruisers and light corvettes shown as blue icons. The numbers were not in her favor. Mentor Sol gave the command. Simulation begin. Kalen moved instantly. His fleet, a cohesive killing machine, surged forward. He did not hesitate or probe. He launched a direct, overwhelming assault on the center of Jiwoo's formation, using the edge of the nebula to mask his approach until the last second. On the observation deck, the cadets watched, impressed. It was a classic Kalen move, bold, fast, and powerful. Jiwoo's response was slow. Her ship seemed to mill about in confusion. She tried to form a defensive line, but it was too late. Kalen's lead destroyers opened fire. Two of Jiwoo's cruisers were hit immediately. Their icons on the holographic map flashed and then turned gray, signifying they were out of the fight. A soft cheer went up from some of Kalen's supporters. It was already a slaughter. Kalen's voice was calm over the open command channel, a channel all the observers could hear. Your formation is weak, cadet. Your reaction time is slow. This is what happens when emotion is replaced by logic. Jiwoo did not reply. Her ships began to fall back, retreating deeper into the safety of the nebula. It looked like panic. It looked like a rout. Kalen pressed his advantage. He ordered his entire fleet to pursue. This was the mistake Jiwoo was waiting for. He was so sure of his victory, so focused on the kill, that he did not notice the pattern of her retreat. She was not running away randomly. She was pulling his ships into a specific, narrow corridor of space, a path lined with dense nebula clouds. He's taking the bait, a quiet voice said on the observation deck. It was one of the Velen cadets. No one paid him any attention. Kalen's fleet pushed deeper, his sensors struggling against the nebula's interference. The brilliant red blob of his armada stretched out, chasing the scattered blue dots of Jiwoo's forces. Then, Jiwoo gave her first order. Her voice was flat and calm, devoid of any emotion. All corvettes, sacrifice Protocol Theta. Execute. On the map, 3 of her small, cheap corvettes, which had seemed to be fleeing, suddenly turned around. They did not fire their weapons. Instead, they powered their engines to maximum and flew directly into the path of Kalen's advancing destroyers. There was a moment of confusion on the observation deck. What was she doing? It was a waste. The corvettes were instantly vaporized by the destroyers' forward guns, but their destruction served a purpose. The resulting debris, combined with the energy released by their exploding reactors, mixed with the volatile gases of the nebula. On the holographic map, a large section of space behind Kalen's fleet suddenly turned into a solid wall of blinding static. It was a perfect sensor blind spot. Kalen's fleet was now cut off from its line of retreat. More importantly, their long-range sensors were useless. They were blind in every direction except straight ahead. Kalen laughed over the open comms. The sound was sharp and clear in the quiet observation deck. Desperation, the Terran's last resort. She sacrifices her own ships for a momentary distraction. It changes nothing, he was wrong. It changed everything. The sacrifice was not a distraction. It was the first move in a trap, and he had just sailed right into it. He was so busy watching the pieces he had already broken that he failed to see the board being set up around him. Jiwoo had not been retreating. She had been hurting him, and now the gate was closed. A tense silence had fallen on the observation deck. The initial easy victory they had expected for Kalen was gone. The humans' move, the sacrifice of her own ships, was brutal and shocking. It was not a standard tactic. No one taught that at the academy. It was wasteful, it was ugly. On the holographic map, Kalen's fleet, a brilliant red swarm, was now deep inside the nebula. The sensor blind spot created by the destroyed corvettes was a murky brown cloud behind them, blocking their way back. Jiwoo's remaining blue ships were scattered, hidden within the swirling purple and blue gases ahead of him. Kalen's voice came over the open comm again, but the smooth confidence was now touched with irritation. A clever trick, cadet, but tricks will not save you. You have fewer ships now. My victory is inevitable. He regrouped his destroyers, forming them into a tight defensive sphere. It was a smart move. It made his main force almost invulnerable to attack from the smaller surviving defender ships. He began to advance again, more cautiously this time, using his cruiser screen to probe ahead. She's lost, a Cathari cadet whispered. She wasted her ships for nothing. She has no way to punch through that formation. But Jiwoo was not trying to punch through. Her calm, emotionless voice crackled over her private fleet channel. All units. Priority target Alpha. The flagship's sensor and communication array. Concentrate all fire. Ignore all other vessels. On the observation deck, the cadets and instructors could see the order log, but they could not hear her. They saw the designator Priority Target Alpha appear on the hologram. It was not one of Kalen's powerful destroyers. It was a single, unremarkable ship near the center of his formation, a support vessel. Its job was to coordinate sensor data and relay communications for the entire fleet. It was the brain that connected the body. A murmur of confusion rippled through the observers. Why target that? It was lightly armored, but destroying it wouldn't win the battle. Kalen still had all his guns. From within the nebula, Jiwoo's remaining ships emerged. They did not come from one direction. They came from all sides. Her two remaining cruisers and handful of corvettes ignored the menacing destroyers completely. They flew straight past them, taking devastating fire as they did so. One of her cruisers exploded under the combined guns of two destroyers. It was another loss, another sacrifice, but it created an opening. For a single critical moment, the path to the support vessel was clear. Jiwoo's entire remaining force, every last ship, focused their simulated laser fire on the single, unarmed support ship. Beams of light converged on it from multiple angles. Its shields flared and died in an instant. A moment later, the ship erupted into a silent, blossoming sphere of white light on the holographic map. Its icon turned gray. And then, something strange happened to Kalen's fleet. The tight, coordinated sphere of red icons began to waver. The ships drifted, their movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. On the main display, a system alert flashed next to Kalen's fleet status. Communications jammed. Sensor fusion offline. The brain was dead. The fleet was now just a collection of individual limbs, blind, deaf, and dumb. Kalen's command ship was still there, but he could no longer talk to his other ships or see anything beyond the view from his own windows. In his command pod, Kalen stared at his screens in disbelief. They were a mess of static and error messages. He could not issue orders. He could not see the enemy. He slammed his hand on the console. Reboot the network. Find the enemy. This is a malfunction. He was no longer a brilliant admiral. He was just a lone captain in a very large ship. On the observation deck, the understanding was dawning. Mentor Sol leaned forward, his large eyes fixed on the map. He saw what Jiwoo had done. She had not tried to defeat the fleet. She had decapitated it. Then Jiwoo gave her final order. Her voice was still a flat, calm monotone, but the words she spoke were terrifying in their simplicity. All remaining units. Lock trajectory on the invader flagship. Divert all power from shields and life support to engines and weapons. Arm all warheads. This is a full commitment attack. On the hologram, the last few blue icons, a single battered cruiser and 3 small corvettes, suddenly glowed with a fierce, dangerous red as they overloaded their systems. They turned as one and flew directly toward Kalen's command ship. They did not fire as they approached. They did not try to evade the few panicked shots from the nearby destroyers. One corvette was blown apart. Then another. They just kept coming. Alarms blared inside Kalen's command pod. His own screens, limited as they were, showed the incoming hostiles. They were on a suicide run. This is insane, he shouted, his voice cracking over the open comm which was still functioning from his ship. She's ignoring the victory conditions. This is not a valid strategy. She's just trying to kill me. That was exactly what she was trying to do. The simulation AI calculated the trajectories and the massive energy signatures from the overloaded ships. The human cruiser, its hull glowing white-hot from the strain, slammed directly into the side of Kalen's flagship. The impact itself was catastrophic. A millisecond later, its warp core, pushed far beyond its safety limits, detonated. The explosion was immense. On the holographic map, it was a white, expanding circle of pure destruction. It consumed Kalen's flagship utterly. Then the shockwave, feeding on the volatile particles of the Calvos Nebula, did something unexpected. It triggered a chain reaction. The white circle of destruction grew, flashing through the nebula like lightning. It engulfed the drifting, leaderless destroyers of Kalen's fleet. Then it reached the last of Jiwoo's ships and consumed them. 2. The entire holographic map flashed pure, blinding white. Then it went dark for a second before the stark, simple result appeared in the center of the display. Battle result. Mutual annihilation. Fleet status. Invader, 0% operational. Defender, 0%. Operational simulation conclusion. Draw. The observation deck was utterly silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the words, a draw. She had fought the Academy's best to a draw. But it did not feel like a draw. It felt like something else entirely. It felt like a statement written in fire and blood. The silence in the observation deck was heavy and deep. It was broken by the sharp hiss of a command pod door opening. Kalen stormed out. The beautiful shifting colors of his skin were a chaotic, furious red and black. He strode to the center of the room, his eyes fixed on Mentor Sol. "This is a farce," he declared, his voice loud and sharp in the quiet. "She cheated. There was no tactical logic in that. That madness, it was a draw, a waste. She sacrificed her entire command for nothing. She gained no advantage. She achieved nothing." He was breathing heavily, his 3-fingered hands clenched into fists. The other cadets watched, stunned by his outburst. They had never seen the cool, brilliant Kalen so completely unraveled. The hiss of the second pod door was much quieter. Jiwoo stepped out. She looked pale, but her face was still calm. She walked slowly to stand before Mentor Sol, ignoring Kalen completely. Her movements were tired, but her back was straight. The old Velen mentor looked from one cadet to the other. His large dark eyes were unreadable. He finally spoke, his voice a low, calm thrum that filled the room. "Cadet Jiwoo," he said, "explain your actions." The simulation's primary victory condition for the Defender was the preservation of the planet. A secondary condition was the survival of a percentage of your fleet. You achieved neither. You sacrificed your entire command to destroy a single ship. By the standard metrics of this academy, you achieved nothing. You have no victory points. This is recorded as a draw, a neutral outcome. Kalen let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You see? Even the mentor agrees. It was meaningless destruction. The impulse of a cornered animal. Jiwoo finally turned her head and looked at Kalen. Her gaze was not angry. It was cold and clear like a winter sky. The intensity in her eyes made his laughter die in his throat. She turned back to Mentor Sol. "You are incorrect, sir," she said, her voice flat and firm. "I achieved the mission's only true strategic objective." A murmur ran through the crowd. How could she contradict the mentor? "Explain," Mentor Sol said, his expression unchanged. The simulation parameters stated the invader fleet's command structure was centralized and wholly reliant on their flagship's sensor and communication hub. Jiwoo began, as if she were reciting from a manual. I identified that single point of failure. Kalen believes victory is about conserving resources and winning battles. He fights to prove he is the best. I was not fighting a battle. I was ending a threat. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the holographic projectors. Kalen's fleet was superior, she continued. In a long battle, he would have won. He would have destroyed my fleet, reached the planet, and achieved his victory conditions. My only path to success was to make that victory impossible. By destroying his command ship, I made his fleet useless. By destroying my own fleet in the process, I removed any possibility of him claiming even a partial victory. There was no planet to capture. There was no enemy left to fight. There was only wreckage. I turned his certain victory into absolute nothing. She looked at Kalen again. You attacked me in class to prove a point. You wanted to demonstrate your superiority. My response was not an emotional one. It was a calculated lesson. Her voice was still quiet, but every word was like a chip of ice falling onto the floor. You can attack me. You can hurt me. You can believe yourself my better. But if you do, know this. She took a small step toward him, and he, to his own surprise, took a small step back. I will not try to win your game. I will not fight you on your terms. I will burn the entire game board to the ground myself with it if necessary, just to ensure you never ever get to play again. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a profound, ringing quiet that seemed to swallow all sound. The other cadets stared at Jiwoo. They saw not a volatile, emotional human, but something far more terrifying, a being of pure, cold, and ruthless will. She was not driven by a desire to win. She was driven by a willingness to make victory itself meaningless for her enemy. This was not the fight or flight they had read about. This was something else. This was the will to end the fight permanently. Kalen stood frozen. All the color had drained from his skin, leaving him a pale, washed-out gray. He had no words. His brilliant mind, which could calculate quantum trajectories and complex fleet maneuvers, could not process this. He had tried to prove humans were illogical animals, and she had responded with a logic so brutal and final that it left him hollow. She had not just beaten him in a simulation. She had broken his entire understanding of conflict. Mentor Soul was silent for a long time. He looked at Jiwoo, and for the first time a new expression crossed his ancient face. It was not approval, and it was not disapproval. It was a deep, profound respect, mixed with a touch of something that looked like fear. The simulation is concluded, he announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. The result stands. Mutual annihilation. He turned his gaze to the assembled cadets. You have all witnessed something today. The Cathari way is one of brilliant control. The Veln way is one of harmony. We have taught you these things. But today you have seen the Terran way. It is not a way of war as we understand it. It is a way of survival. It is a promise. Do not mistake their patience for weakness. Do not mistake their calm for surrender. And never ever make the error of believing that because you have hurt them, you have won. He looked back at Jiwoo, who was still standing calmly amidst the stunned silence. Cadet Jiwoo, your performance was instructive. You are dismissed. Jiwoo bowed her head slightly. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd of cadets parted for her, not with pity or wariness this time, but with a new, awestruck fear. They looked at her, and they finally understood the words, Terran tenacity. It was not a refusal to surrender. It was the promise of a price too high for anyone to pay. Kalen did not watch her go. He stood alone in the middle of the room, staring at the blank holographic map where his fleet had been destroyed. He had attacked first in class, and she had ended it, not with a shout but with a silence that was more powerful than any explosion. She had ended it ruthlessly.